So everybody, we're going to get started a little late. We're having insurance. We're probably not going to start till 1:10.
Okay. 10.
To order at 1:09 p.m. Welcome, everyone. Let's do a round of introductions. I'm Nancy Wise, Commissioner and Chair.
Pat Malone, Commissioner and Vice Chair.
Susanna Giroux, Commissioner.
Joe Kirby, County Administrator.
And we'll go to the audience for introductions.
And Kirby, manage the Justice System Improvement Program for Benton County.
I'm Alicia Marie, the social navigator with our event. Allison Hoffman, I usually go from the thank you director of the criminal official director. And Brenda Down, I'm the communications coordinator for the Justice System Improvement Program. And Beekman, Jacob, administrative.
Amanda Makepeace, Administrative Assistant.
All right. And is there anyone online who would like to introduce themselves?
This is Corey Grogan, Benton County Public Information Officer.
Peggy Lynch, Benton County citizen.
Peggy Lynch.
Oh, and we
I know-
can't hear you.
Vance Crony, County Council.
Gary Stockoff, Public Works.
Chris Edmonds, Coastline
We
Public.
cannot hear you either, Chris. So one moment, please, and we will figure out our audio issues. Can someone online try to speak and we'll see if we can hear you.
Peggy Lynch, Benton County citizen.
I see your mouth moving, but I do not hear anything.
Could you?
Is the sound bar up on our TV?
Could you hear me, Commissioner Wise?
Okay, and they can hear each other.
It's a good sound.
Not a problem. All right, can someone online say something again?
Vance Crony, County Council.
Yay.
Hey, hallelujah.
Peggy Lynch,
right,
Benton
so
County citizen.
Welcome. Anyone else online who would like to introduce themselves?
Gary Stockoff, Public Works.
Chris Edmonds, Coastline Public Relations.
All right, welcome everyone. Do we have any announcements?
No.
No announcements. We will review and approve the agenda. Any changes to the agenda?
No.
All right, that brings us to comments from the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to make comment for up to 3 minutes? I will ask for those in the room first and then take any online. Is there anyone in the room who would like to provide public comment? Seeing and hearing none, we will ask online. Peggy, would you like to provide comment?
Thank you, Chair. I really am here today because I am very interested in the public safety process and the recommendations that you may have regarding adding some degree of homeless recognition and the need to address it in the May bond. It is really important that the Benton County citizens who provided the survey information feel comfortable with the recommendations that you're making, working on it from the state level and trying to make sure that there's money for infrastructure, for urban growth boundary that exists, lands that exist today is going to be a really important component. So we're hopeful that whatever you recommend will move people towards support. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else online who would like to provide public comment? Hearing and seeing none, we will move on to our Justice System Improvement Program, Homeless Services Facility Recommendation with Nick Kurth, our Justice System Improvement Program Manager. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Weiss, Commissioners, County Administrator, County Council. I really appreciate this opportunity, special meeting on a Monday to present and consider recommendations around inclusion of homeless services facilities in the proposed JSIP bond measure. Okay, thank you.
So for those of us online, we are just trying to screen share.
Are you able to send me that a little more? Thank you, no problem. Okay. Thank you. I did want to acknowledge that I invited Allison Hobgood from the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center here today to answer any questions that you may have regarding the recommendation. And as well, I'm going to ask her to briefly talk about one of the recommendations that aligns with her organization and partnerships. With that, a little bit of background. So should be familiar. We have conducted 2 community surveys in Corvallis this year. They were conducted by DHM Research, are statistically significant. And in both homeless services facilities, addressing homelessness was a top priority in Benton County. Following the second survey that was consistent with the first, you, the commissioners, instructed staff to investigate options for homeless services facilities to discuss at a future meeting, which is today, and consider including them in the Justice System Improvement Program bond measure for May of 2023. Staff has actually since had 3 meetings since I think your October 18th meeting that provided those instructions. And so we're here today to present those recommendations. In terms of current situation, of the options that were considered, and really probably the options set as a whole, all require additional funding elements to be brought to fruition. In other words, either state or other external grants or earmarks are needed to complete so that we can maximize the benefit to the community. So on the one hand, we want to be specific in our proposal and our bond language, but also recognize that because there's additional funding that's needed that is uncertain, we may have to pivot at some point in the future. And so we also want our bond language to be flexible enough to accommodate that. So let's see. Make a point of, yeah. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so our objective today then is really to align on a preferred option for inclusion of homelessness services facilities in the May bond measure. And our approach, as I just described, will be to arrive at a preferred option, but also have flexible bond language that can accommodate those funding unknowns. That one looks good. All right, and so in terms of the options set, I'm going to talk about several of these and then invite Allison to talk briefly about the homelessness services Housing Navigation Center. So a secure residential treatment facility was one of the options that the health department presented. And in fact, just to back up a little bit, at our first of 3 meetings, County Administrator Joe Kirby asked the health department to create a set of recommendations for consideration. All are essentially captured here. And so secure residential treatment facility, that is essentially transitional housing with on-site mental health treatment for unsheltered people who are in the justice system. So that is a secure residential treatment facility, or commonly known by its acronym SRTF. And I think you're well aware that the county is pursuing grant funding for an SRTF, regardless of any decision today. I'm going to skip the Homelessness Services Housing Navigation Center. We'll end with that, with Allison talking about that. Permanent, short, or long-term housing, whether transitional housing or a micro shelter community. We talked about just permanent and long-term housing. I will remind you that from the second survey, we actually had a question on that point, and the community, at least in answering that question, was very split on which was more important. That doesn't mean that they were equally divided. That could also mean they simply didn't know, but we did ask a question about that, and the prioritization was pretty evenly split. Health department also mentioned heating, cooling, smoke, air quality, shelter. Certainly that's a sheltering option that is needed in the community. And then finally, there's sort of the default, which is simply having a general bucket. And this is the non-specific alternative of just saying, the bond measure will include homelessness facilities, services, and leaving it at that with no preferred option. So it's the default, but it doesn't have the value really of a preferred option. And let me invite Allison to come on up here and say a few words about the Navigation Center, please.
Thank you. Is this good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I appreciate you all having me here. Thank you, Nick, for letting me say a couple of things. And I know that this is a decision-making meeting, so I hope that you all understand I'm here just to say things as neutrally as possible, and I'm open to all questions and feedback if you want to talk more later. And I think there are a lot of really important projects that are on the table here. So I hope everyone knows at this point that I'm the executive director at the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, and we are a resource and navigation hub for people in poverty in our community in Benton County and beyond. And the Navigation Center project would allow us to increase our impact and our supports. There's a lot of need, as folks know, in the community. And so the Navigation Center project, there are precedents for this around the state. Other navigation centers are, as they should be, tailored to the specific needs of a particular community. So we've been thinking a lot about that, but there are typically 3 component parts. And some of this we already have going at the center and would just be able to amplify. And then we would add another piece into the puzzle. So navigation centers are what folks have been referring to as one-stop shops. So there are a lot of service providers who work together collaboratively in-house in a space to offer community members who need supports direct, really low barrier access to those supports and really trauma-informed and trustworthy kinds of ways. It's hard to navigate systems, and to break those barriers down is really important in the work. The second piece would be drop-in day services. So the drop-in center model that we have now would continue to be a part of the navigation center model. People could come, spend time during the day, get the supports that they need, access the needs navigators and the social service providers that are there. And then, that piece of what we're already doing would just be retained in the navigation center as it was amplified. And then the third piece, which is again modeled after the navigation centers around the state, there's a non-congregate respite or emergency shelter piece to the navigation center. A series of units that allow some of the most vulnerable people in the community to get immediate stabilization, be able to get some time to just have like respite from the challenges that they're experiencing, and then give them a little more time to kind of onboard back into the community. And of course, ideally, this is all the front door step to getting people into housing and into more stable spaces. So our job at the navigation center and at the drop-in center now is to welcome people into that space, invite them to think as they can about next steps for their future, plug them into people who could support them around that. And then as affordable housing frees up, make sure that they can get indoors when they're ready. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments?
Oh, yeah.
I guess, you mentioned respite, so the county is in the process of designing and building a respite center. Do you have a notion how what you're talking about would fit in with our health department's respite center?
So I don't know a ton about the health department respite center plan. So do you want to just say a little bit more, Pat? So I'm.
Well, our respite center is intended to be for mental health crisis.
The crisis center.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's not just a respite for anyone that is unhoused. And so I think
Okay.
that's the biggest distinction.
Okay, great. I do know about the crisis center. So that's a great question. Thank you. I just needed to get some semantic clarification. Yeah, so I think it's a good question, an important one. I think they're two very different entities. There are a lot of folks that we serve through the drop-in center that are folks who are experiencing mental health disabilities or crises, but our space is not a clinical space. And so the kind of clinical approach, which is very necessary, that will happen at the crisis center will be that kind of crisis intervention. It's a different model. It's coming out of the health department. A navigation center uses more of a social services approach. And that means that there may be people who are staying there, right, who would need behavioral health supports, and they would need help with medications. But that would be kind of one part of a larger wraparound support experience, let's say, that a guest who is staying at the navigation center would get. So I think there's a kind of targeted clinical approach through a crisis center, which is important. This is about maybe a little bit more of a holistic health and wellness approach that also involves, goal setting and next steps for how people can move forward. And sure, mental health stabilization can sometimes be a piece of that, but it's just a piece of it.
Okay, that's helpful, and I'm a big fan of one-stop shopping. I don't care what you're shopping for. It is that just makes sense to have a hub where all kinds of services can be represented and potentially accessed.
Thanks. If I may, for just one second, what I like about the model that we have going and the version of that in an expanded form also is that often people are not sure what they need even. And so until you walk into a space and feel comfortable and loved and seen, you don't really even know. It's like, what would the next step be? And then all of a sudden someone says, oh, well, we can help with your ID, but that also means you could think about employment and when you have kind of all those players in a room, it allows, I think, for people to access a lot more services at a faster rate in a low barrier way. And yeah, I know you're standing in the store and you're like, what am I even trying to buy today? So it helps with that kind of pressure and just the logistics of figuring out who to talk to and where and when.
Well, relatively recently, our sheriff's office has prepared a brochure for adults in custody being released, and there's 50 or 60 different categories, and and without some guidance, I mean, that could be overwhelming. Well, I'll call this number. Well, I called and left a
Exactly.
message, but I don't have a phone.
Or I don't have a phone, right?
Uh,
Yeah.
So,
And we all just need advocacy in our lives. And so to have a human being who's there with a few other human beings who are a team of people, the other cool thing about a one-stop shop is that there's so much that happens behind the scenes between service providers as well. Oh, you saw Zan today? I did too. How, and if you put humans in a room together, you
Right.
can facilitate a lot of that. Well, much better than you can if you're just trying to find people in their org. So it's, I love at the drop-in center having people there to partner on site. It's powerful.
well, as long as we have Matt here, our juvenile department does that kind of collaboration, getting people around the table to talk about people they're serving. So that have a better chance of having that individual have a relatively smooth going through the system and getting guidance as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ojo.
Yeah, I was wondering, and this may be a question for both of you to some degree, will the vision for the navigation center have a large enough common area, common space that it might be used for that emergency heating, cooling, air quality shelter?
Yes.
Let's see how it is. This has come up, Zan, in a couple of other contexts, like, well, if we had a facility that was larger and there was common shared space, could there be a partnership around, getting people in safer spaces as they're willing to come in weather? And I don't think that is outside the realm of possibility. I think that's a kind of later on down the road to 2.0, 3.0, and what would it look like to invite other partners who let's say wanted to spearhead that effort, and we could help and offer a space. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for multi-use kinds of spaces. But for now, I had just sort of bracketed, like, this is the project as it stands, and we're going to kind of keep it focused there just so we don't lose focus. But I don't think something like that should be off the table for sure.
Thank you.
That's very good. I appreciate the distinction. That's very helpful for all of us and anyone online that's listening.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You can give it a little more of a nudge. Yeah, please. There we go. Thank you. That's great. So in terms of evaluation criteria, pretty comprehensive set here. Certainly the first bullet, I could probably check off, for every one of the options that you saw. But I wanted it to be up there so that you understood that certainly filling, a compelling need, filling a gap was considered. Second, aligning with previously approved HOPE recommendations, extremely important. The HOPE body has done tremendous amount of good work. Certainly, we want to leverage that work, and really from the outset of considering options, the HOPE recommendations were paramount in terms of alignment. And I will also share that these 3 meetings that we had, they were represented by Julie Arena, Rebecca Taylor, and Damian Sands from the health department. So we were well informed and had a very collaborative process as we talked through these options. Third bullet may be one of the most important up here, involving outside stakeholders and support partnerships and collaboration. And I'm gonna invite Chris Edmonds to say a few words about this one, if I may, but I will just preface it by saying that JSIP has been a very broad, complex, comprehensive, system-focused program and is. But we really have an opportunity area in terms of our outside partnerships and collaboration. And so, Chris, maybe you could just say a couple of words on this bullet point, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this kind of aligns, this bullet point aligns with the mission of JSIP, which is an inclusive project that has involved multiple community stakeholder groups along the way. It was important for us to make really a clear recommendation that JSIP continue in that path, which means allowing the community to drive a lot of the agenda, the process, and the need. And I think that what we saw, this is probably the clearest example of that the JSIP recommendations, when we took them out to survey, we found broad community support for the current components of the JSIP bond that are under consideration right now. But we also found in that survey that there was a huge gap, and that was a need that the community was clamoring for that hadn't been originally constituted as part of JSIP when JSIP was created 5 years ago. We've just seen this emerging need. And so given the fact that our surveys have shown a clear emphasis on homelessness within the community, it makes sense that the community is involved in driving this process. And it's also really likely that a project that involves outside stakeholders, partnerships, collaborations, not only do we see that in implementation, those projects tend to work better, that they bring people together and that they, divine efficiencies and start to bring, multi-jurisdictional approaches to solving some of these common challenges. But also, we know that community members are better communicators to community members, than county government or, more official organizations. And so the ability to be able to bring in an energized group of stakeholders into the JSIP fold who can help in the communications efforts as we move into the spring is certainly advantageous.
Great, thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris? All right, I'll keep moving then. Easily communicated and understood by the public. So some of, I started out by saying all of these options are, filling gaps and meet a compelling need. All are not as easily understood. And, in all candor, the first time I heard SRTF was 3 weeks ago when we got into this conversation. And I think it was Damian Sands, Deputy Health Department Director, who said, an SRTF is a very niche product. He used the word niche. And so while absolutely necessary, a little more difficult to communicate and share with the public. And frankly, if we were a year ago having this discussion, that wouldn't be as important a consideration. But we did make the decision to include homelessness facilities services relatively late in our communication process. So it's important to pick something that the public can understand and still provide input on. So that was one of the objectives. As well, demonstrable public process. Simply, we didn't want to be starting from square one on something. We wanted to, if we could, find a project that had already cultivated, partnerships, and certainly the Navigation Center is a good example of that. And Allison is well down the road in terms of who the service providers are, bringing on CETA to do pro bono design and engineering work. And then the list goes on, really. So having already made progress, having, a plan in place was important. As well, we're not in a position to fund an entire project at this point in the tens of millions of dollars. But we may be able to be a catalyst, and that's really important, and especially when there's outside funding, state or federal earmarks, having that match, as you've heard from Rick Krager many times, is extremely important in terms of garnering attention, maintaining momentum, and ultimately getting a project over the finish line. Site location sensitivity is certainly on our minds. We've gone through, a very exhaustive site process. And frankly, with many of these projects, there is sensitivity. So again, if there's one that sort of minimizes that sensitivity, that's seen as a benefit. And then finally, survey tested. And this, we did do a couple of surveys. We did ask questions about homelessness facilities, services, and specifically about the navigation center. And so we have some data to rely on for that. Okay, we could just scroll that up just a teeny bit. So to cut to the chase, in terms of the ranking, really the secure residential treatment facility and the homelessness resources and housing navigation center bubbled to the top. I put the default up there because you always have the default option. But as you can see, the navigation center really checks off all of the boxes. And so again, not to diminish the need for SRTF, not to diminish the need for heating, cooling, smoke center, or for additional housing. They are all important. But in terms of our objectives and where we are with our timeline, the navigation center seems like the strongest option and is the recommendation that staff is presenting you with today. And so just to that end, the recommendation is to include funding in the JSIP bond measure for homelessness services facilities with a preferred option in support of the Corvallis Daytime Drop-in Center's planned homelessness resources housing navigation center project. I will note that I specifically lowercased that name because an official name has not been decided upon, so I didn't want to put boundaries around that discussion. It's not really for us to decide. And that funding would represent a portion of the total cost. I will add that I didn't get into any costing numbers today. The reason for that is we will take that up as part of our broader JSIP bond measure package discussions beginning on December 6th. I will answer any questions that you have to the best of my ability, but would prefer we defer that conversation until we get into the specifics of the bond package discussion in early December. Finally, second recommendation here is that we do prioritize the funding for the navigation as part of our legislative process. And I will add that City of Corvallis is in the early stages of also looking at the navigation funding as part of its prioritization process as well, legislative process. Nothing definitive at all at this point, but they will be submitting a list of recommendations to the League of Oregon Cities, and one of those recommendations will include the navigation center. So potential opportunity down the road for further collaboration with the City of Corvallis. That concludes the presentation portion, and invite any questions.
Sure, comments or questions. I have a comment or two.
Hmm.
I really liked the list of criteria. I think that was very good, very complete. And I think one thing that I would either add or kind of pull out of there is, perhaps it's part of number one, filling a gap. But for me, and I think for all of us, it's important that whatever we do is actually going to be impactful. That we're not just saying we're doing this to check a box. We're doing this to actually make a difference. And kind of on the flip side of that, I want to make sure that we are actually helping the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center to make a difference, and not just saying, oh, look at the good work that our friends over there are doing. We're just going to kind of piggyback off them and take credit for it. So definitely want to make sure that that it has an actual impact, a positive impact in our community.
Well, I'll share, Commissioner Weiss. All of this came about very quickly, as you know. And Allison and I were able to sit down face to face for the first time last week, although we've had a couple of conversations and exchanged emails, actually dating back several months, because the Navigation Center was brought to my attention by Julie Arena many months ago, something I should be aware of. And so Allison and I talked, but to her credit, one of the things she stressed is she's really looking for actionable partnerships and collaboration here. Exactly to the point that you just made, and that was really impactful to me. And I think what we're looking aligns well with what you're talking about and what we're talking about doing here.
Sure, come on up.
Not to hog the mic back, but one of the things that I've appreciated in talking with Nick and others in this room and beyond is that conversation. Like, how is this a moment where we are really uniquely poised to do something new and powerful and different that is a transformative model for collaboration that's going to do transformative work in the community. And I'm really committed as a person to that. And so we've talked a lot about that. The other thing that, especially if there are folks in the public who are listening to this meeting, I wanted to just be clear about, I've also appreciated the care in our conversations around what it might mean to include homelessness services as part of a larger justice project, and the important intention that we need to set, that Nick is very aware of and that we've talked a lot about, around the kinds of bias that exists that would link up criminalization and folks who are homeless, and say, no, that's not what's happening here. We're talking about important diversion and innovative, support systems to not move people toward incarceration, right, but away from it. Or if that has been an experience that they have had, how can we support them better so that we are not just seeing a lot of recidivism? And so those have been, for me, really important dialogues that I think inform this kind of partnership should we go forward in key ways. So, and then just one other thing I wanted to add, in case there was any confusion to other folks, you were talking about site sensitivity, and just if people in the world are hearing that, or they don't know what that means, what I understand that to mean is that also the Navigation Center is not going to be located on the Justice campus. Like, can we be clear about that? I think I just did. So, and so that kind of like the crisis center, it will be its own thing. And so there will also be that important non-physical alignment of, let's say, a jail and folks who are experiencing, being unhoused. So just a clarifying point I should have said when I was up here too, but okay, cool. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, other comments or questions?
Commissioner, I just have a quick comment. Nick referred to the 3 meetings that we held with staff. I believe I was involved in 2, if not all 3 of those respective meetings. And I really do want to applaud Nick and other members of our team. I think we did a really good job of thoroughly exploring this concept. And as Nick mentioned a number of weeks ago, this wasn't even something that we were envisioning, but you have to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. And I think our internal team really felt that this, through that exploration, that this was the best project to support as a preferred the alternative, if you will, within the bond. And so I just wanted to make sure that you knew that our health department and others were intricately involved or integrally involved in those conversations and support what's being suggested here tonight.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say I'm strongly in support of this project and happy to make a motion anytime we're ready.
I appreciate the speed that this came together because seemed like not too long ago, it was a warm and fuzzy concept and that we think generally support, but to get this into closer to the specifics, and this is what we're this is what we want to buy into. And I really like the idea of multiple partners, multiple funding streams for what I assume will be a pretty good sized project as far as financing. So thank you for getting me out of the warm and fuzzy to having something fairly concrete to talk about.
All right, well, I would love to entertain a motion.
Well, I would move that we include funding in the Justice System Improvement Program bond measure for homeless services facilities with the preferred option in support of Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center's planned homelessness resources and housing navigation center. And in tandem with that, that we prioritize additional funding for the Daytime Drop-In Center's homelessness resources and housing navigation center as part of our county 2023 legislative agenda.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, very good. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And with that, it takes us to other. Is there anything else for the good of the order? All right, well, I am happy to adjourn us at 1:51 p.m. Thank you, everyone.